there. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters, writers, editors, filmmakers, photographers, all different people who are writing stuff and putting stuff out in the Bronx. And we thought we'd do something special because something unusual and frankly very difficult happened in our borough, and that was the nurses' strike that recently has been settled. And we have a reporter in our first segment who wrote about it, and we're going to talk in depth about what happened and what some of the fallout might be. And in our second segment, we have the head of the Nurses Association that is going to join us. So we'll be able to break down what the negotiations were like, et cetera, et cetera. So should be a rather interesting and intensive program. Let's start off with Bahar Ostaden, who's the accountability reporter. We'll find out what that means with WNYC Gothamist. Bahar, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thanks for having me on.
Let's just start there. Who is the accountability reporter? We're all accountable.
It's a great question. Someone on my team described it the other day in a way that I liked, which was holding the local city government accountable for what it says it will and won't do. So I think kind of crosses a lot of different spheres, but I started recently, so we'll see how it plays out.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I don't know that I've ever heard. I mean, we've heard of like an efficiency person in a company, where they make sure that they're spending money right. But an accountability reporter, all right, we're going to chase you around for a while and find out how that works out. And then just before we get into the nurses' strike, which you have written about, I'm just curious about you. How did you end up here, where you are at one of the very important places in New York City, and that is WNYC Gothamist?
Yeah, so I had mostly done freelance reporting before this, and actually was doing like totally non-journalistic work. I was in data analytics for a while, but the more I wrote and did interviews on the side of my job, the more I wanted to do it full time. And so I feel very lucky to work here. I went back to school for journalism, and somehow they let me into the office. So it's been a fun ride so far.
When you say back to school, did I read that you went to the Craig Newmark School? Is that what you
I went to Columbia Journalism.
The Columbia Journalism. Oh, a little place like that.
Little place uptown.
Yeah, it's uptown. Well, that's great. And just that one last question before we get into the nurses' strike. What do you like about doing this? What for you is the interesting thing? Because you're making people accountable. Is that
I think, yeah, that. I personally just love that I get to meet people who I never otherwise would speak to, probably if this wasn't my job, across all parts of the city. That for me is like consistently the most fulfilling part.
I guess that leads us right into the nurses' strike. So in order to cover this, did you go to the strike? Did you talk to nurses? I mean, how did you, you wrote two stories. One was what New Yorkers need to know as they begin the nurses' strike. And then the second was nurses detailed turmoil inside New York City hospitals amid the strike, with a quote of people don't know what they're doing. So in order to do the reporting, let's start there. What'd you do to gather the info? Was it phone calls? I mean, that's possible.
Mostly phone calls, because to be honest, I was focused on getting people who were still inside the hospital at the time of the strike and less people who were on the picket line. Because
that would have been great. I'm a nosy reporter. Can I just wander around for a while?
Can I just pop in? Yeah.
Get through hospital security at Mount Sinai and Montefiore. Good luck.
Right. Especially then, that they would have loved that.
Yeah, right. Oh, goodness.
So yeah, it was mostly, like we'd meet people on the picket line, and they would introduce us to people who were either travel or agency nurses who were still working inside because they couldn't join the strike. So it was mostly, I mean, as you know, too, nurses, their hours are pretty crazy. It's just kind of text messages and phone calls at whatever hour they were able to get information out.
I'm going to use the word pain because that's, a large part of being a nurse is, relieving pain. There was pain all over. The nurses didn't want to have to strike. They have been pained because they have been, they believed that they were being abused, and ultimately the patients were being abused. So there was pain there. And certainly the hospital didn't, neither hospital, let's talk about Mount Sinai and Montefiore, which were the last two holdouts. Neither of those institutions certainly wanted to see this kind of chaos and threat to patient care, et cetera, et cetera. So this really was about pain. And by the way, in our second segment, we'll have the head of the Nurses Association. How definitive were they that it's worth making the sacrifice, potentially losing pay, potentially compromising patients who they care for? Were they hardline? Were they strong about their beliefs?
That my understanding is yes. I think, like you said, nurses were upset that they had to leave their patients, especially nurses who work in, like the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, where we have premature and critically ill babies, newborn babies. They're emotionally attached to their patients in a lot of those instances, and I think they were upset to have to leave them. But most nurses I spoke to said this is long overdue. So there was one ER nurse at Montefiore who said on an average night, he is responsible for up to 25, he said 20 to 25 patients in the emergency room at a
In the
time.
emergency room,
Yeah. So for him, he's like,
every one of them has an emergent problem.
right,
25 people.
right, which is pretty unbelievable. And at
That's
on an
amazing.
average night when he has that, he said the hospitals don't make any efforts to redirect ambulances, for example, which is something they did during the strike.
Mhm.
So I think nurses were upset, but this was a long time coming, it sounds like.
There's no question about it, but uh, is the underlying? I've got to ask this question on behalf of the hospitals. Is the real underlying issue that there's a big nursing shortage, that we don't have enough nurses, and so even if we wanted to give you more nurses, we don't have them? Or do you believe the resources are there at least to deal with it?
It's a good question. The nurses union, which I'm sure you'll ask in the next segment too, say that there are up to 600 to 700 nursing vacancies in each of the hospitals. So they claim this has been true for years now. The hospitals themselves aren't as open about the numbers. It's a little bit unclear how many nurses they think are required to staff the hospitals
Right,
to a
of course.
sustainable degree. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but it seems like now that the strike is over and they've reached a deal, hopefully we've reached healthier staffing ratios that will actually be enforced in the future in a way they haven't before.
I should mention, and I'll mention it in our second segment as well. It's of some comfort that Lehman College is literally building a building as we speak. That will be the nursing building where they'll educate more nurses. Boy, we certainly need it. And then from the hospital side, did you get a lot of kind of like crying in our towel, like we can't do it because we don't have the nurses, or were they just really somewhat standoffish?
That I didn't hear so much from them about, there aren't enough nurses. They were sort of, disappointed that it came to this. I think negotiations had been underway throughout the fall last year, and they weren't able to reach an agreement with the nurses union. So I think they were frustrated it even took the 3 days, but negotiations went through. I think it was like 3 a.m. on Thursday morning when it finally both Montefiore and Sinai reached a deal. So I think at the end of the day, everyone just seemed relieved. From what I heard from nurses, they were satisfied with a lot of their demands being met, both in terms of pay, healthcare benefits, and
Mhm.
staffing. So we'll keep monitoring. Hopefully, this will mean nurses will have healthier patient ratios in the future, but maybe it's too soon to tell.
And frankly, a little more sanity in their own lives and their own personal lives,
Right.
because their dedication over the last few years in particular is, with without question. Um,
Definitely.
Here's a question you can't answer, um, and I know you're going to work on it. I had been thinking all along, so just visualizing myself. Okay, so you don't do elective surgery, and people who didn't have to come into the hospital, they didn't. But people got hurt, people got shot, people got cut. They needed stitches right away. Um, the fallout from this has not been talked about yet. We mentioned before the show, in our dialogue, that um, something's going to have to unravel. Do you have a sense of the disaster that it was? Unlike when you go to a car accident, you kind of know what the disaster was. Here, I don't know. Did we do okay? I would certainly hope that nobody got hurt as a result.
Yes and no. It's hard to say because, as you can imagine, it's difficult to get information from hospitals about patient care and treatment. Um, I'll say we spoke to a nurse who said, as of Monday morning, which is when the strike started, there were only 3 nurses working in the ICU in Mount Sinai, where typically there are 7 to 8. that nurse said, she was asked to take care of twice as many patients as usual. So she was responsible for 4 patients in the intensive care unit versus typically 1 or 2. She said the nurses that remained there were asked to work twice as many days in a row, so up to 5 consecutive days, and very long shifts, something like 13 to 14 hours. So, you can imagine that the nurses that remained in there, seems like, especially on some units, were under a lot of pressure and were stretched pretty thin.
I'm sure. I just hope that there was no serious casualty as a result. I can understand you putting off elective surgery. Before we run out of time, you and I mentioned before the show, as part of accountability, is how are we going to measure the mayor's plan to take mentally ill people off the street, even without their consent? At what point is it a good idea to start measuring, is this a good program or not?
It's a good question. We've been talking to civil liberties experts at the New York Civil Liberties Union, and they say in most cases involuntary hospitalization is not warranted. It's an infringement upon your individual liberties and rights as a person. I think a lot of mental health experts say there's a more holistic, community-based approach to a lot of the issues that people in the city are having. It just will require someone who's committed to investing the money in those sorts of solutions, as opposed to,
Yeah, and then the other thing is, our mental health capacities are exploding, and you're going to put more people in some system. The history will show, you just got to look at the homeless population, that people are going to get lost in that system, and you're going to, so it will be interesting to see, is he going to be able to make it work? And certainly I can understand safety and security for all involved, but I don't know that this is the way to do it. We'll find out, I suppose. And you will find out first, and then we will find out from you.
There we
Bahar
go.
Ostaden from the Accountability Reporter from WNYC Gothamist. Thank you so much. Say hello to David and all our friends over there. And we appreciate you taking the time to be with us on the Bronx Buzz. And we're definitely going to call you and have you back again. Keep writing, and that's what you're going to get.
Thanks for having me on. Take care.
Great. All right. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, yes, we will have the head of the New York Nurses Association. Don't go away.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Can you see anything different as a pill?
No.
You don't know?
Fentanyl is being mixed into everything now. There's only one thing that will save somebody's life. That is naloxone nasal spray.
Fentanyl, it's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
Why would drug dealers put a lethal dose of fentanyl in drugs if they know it's so harmful?
Really just all about the money.
I just didn't realize that one pill could change your whole life.
More kids should know.
Hey, boss. Okay?
He said I'm fine.
Put me to bed, see you in the morning. With the frosted Superman, but it wasn't on it. And we lost it.
You can talk to me.
It's been really, really hard for me.
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, we love you always.
Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. And before we get into a very serious and important segment, I need to say happy birthday to our producer, Anderson Peguero. He turned, I don't even know how many years, a number of years, but today is the day that he did that. So happy birthday and thanks for all your great work. Now, we get real serious. And let's talk about the nurses' strike with the former president of the 42,000 member New York State Nurses Association. She's a 40-year nurse at Montefiore Medical Center. She's on the negotiating committee, so we know what's going on in there. Nice to see you again, Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez.
Hello, how are you doing?
We're doing okay. I'm happy that the strike is settled. I want to start with this, and you'll appreciate this. Many years ago, I could look up the date. Former borough president Freddie Ferrer was on my other program, Bronx Talk, and he had just come out. He had finished surgery, and he was well again. And I asked him on the show, how are you doing? Are you okay? And the first thing he said was, I want to tell you something. Nurses are the greatest people in the world. And I remembered that. And anytime I've had to interact, then I said, you better be nice and you better be cool with the people who are the greatest people in the world. So thank you. And thank your colleagues for all that you do. How about that?
Oh, that's really nice to hear. We've been hearing a lot of that lately and we appreciate it.
Well, that's good. So why did you go on strike? I was talking in the previous segment about it's all about pain. It hurt you to go on strike. It hurt patients. Certainly the hospital didn't want to compromise healthcare or anything like that. It was pain all around. But why was it important to you to take a stand?
Well, there's been pain all around for a long time. At Montefiore, which used to have a wonderful reputation, and certainly enough staff to take care of our patients. There have been incredible cuts. COVID hurt us even more. And right now, our patients are not getting the care that they deserve. Our ratios, our nurse to patient ratios are way too high. And our patients aren't treated the way the patients at Montefiore treats up in White Plains, for example. They're not treated the same way. Our equipment, our physical plant is worse. The ER overcrowding is horrendous. Patients are admitted to hallways on stretchers without any privacy, toilets, bathrooms, anything. And the nurses are completely overwhelmed in the caring for our patients. That was the basis for our going on strike. We weren't able to get the hospital to honor the numbers in our contract, and they were not
numbers of patients per nurse per patient.
We have in the contract ratios, like for example, like class size. People are more familiar with class size. You're only allowed to have 25 kids in a class. We're only supposed to have 5 patients, 4 patients, depending on where we were. And in the ER, we were caring for 15 or 20 patients, which was an impossibility. In addition, the patients were crowded together like sardines. And it was just not a humane way in which to take care of human beings.
You've painted a rather difficult picture. And then you said also you didn't quite get what you want. Are you completely dissatisfied or was there some compromise?
In the contract that we have now?
Yes.
Oh, no, we were able to address every issue that mattered. We're really happy with what we were able to do, enforcing the contract. We now have enforcement language with penalties, disincentives for Montefiore to abuse the nurses and the patients, multiple disincentives, and incentives to hire nurses and keep nurses in the institution. So we're quite pleased. We see it as a beginning of repairing the hospital, bringing it back to its former glory.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. One of the things that I brought up in the previous segment, and I'm curious about your perception of it, the COVID, number one, the nurses, of course, were among many heroes during that period of time. Did it exacerbate the problem? So number one, the hospitals were more likely to cut because monies dried up and weren't there. And number two, nurses said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. They worked under incredible pressure. I'm sorry to even consider that we probably lost some due to the pandemic, and that hurt numbers. Was the overall shortage made worse by the pandemic and then made people's emotions worse? So then they said, you know what, we got to do something. You know what I mean? What did the pandemic contribute to this effort and to the desire to say enough is enough?
Well, I think it was the fact that the hospitals didn't really work with the employees. They felt they knew better. And I think anyone in any profession or any job knows that the people who are actually doing the work know best what's needed. We knew what our patients needed. We knew what we needed. We certainly had a big fight about PPE. I think that's a household term now. We weren't given the protections that we needed. And we had approached the hospitals back in January prior to the pandemic going full force in March to work with us to try to prepare. But typically they didn't listen to us. I think you heard a lot of people saying, "You're not listening. You're not listening," and that was a big theme in our marches and in our pickets. Listen to us, work with us, listen to us, because that wasn't happening, and that did exacerbate the problem. We were already understaffed, and Montefiore, instead of investing in patients and nurses, invested in media and PR and in consultants. They used a very expensive consulting group called the McKinsey Group. I'm not sure how many listeners are aware of the McKinsey Group's role in the opioid epidemic and all the many of the other problems we're faced all over the world. They spend millions of dollars for things like that. We're their best consultants. They should consult with us, and that never happened. Hopefully that will change.
Aside from that, I was just going to say that. So, aside from the contract, do you think maybe the dialogue is better? Maybe you gained some commitment to partner and cooperate with these nurses a little better?
I mean, time will tell. We hope so. We think that the hospitals learned one thing: they can't possibly function without us. That was a wake-up call, perhaps, for them, and that nurses are not willing to be abused anymore. We had a relationship like a domestic violence relationship. We were abused partners, and we struck back.
Wow, that's an interesting metaphor. When you take a step back and look at the numbers of nurses, um, it's very easy to look and say, well, wait a minute, we've got whatever the number was, 7,000 nurses who went on strike. We really need, in order to get the coverage that we want, we really need 8,000. I don't know what the numbers are. And the fact is, there's been a nursing shortage. Is there any sympathy to that? Or though your suggestion was that they're spending money elsewhere, and that maybe if they move some of that money to something else, you would
Yeah.
do better. Or is the shortage really a big issue?
They were purposely not hiring nurses. We just won an arbitration today
Oh,
that was filed in 2020 based on the fact multiple reasons why we did so poorly during the pandemic. One of which was they weren't hiring nurses, and they were forced under oath to admit that they had 3,000 nurses in their pipeline wanting to get jobs at Montefiore that they did not hire during COVID.
wow.
3,000. And
That is quite a revelation.
pretty bad. So there are nurses that are willing to work. There are nurses that want to work. They want to make sure that the conditions are better. And they also need to be responded to. We were able to gain some things in the contract that we think will help Montefiore's uh, inept process of hiring and transferring. I can give you 100 examples, which we did during the arbitration. So we're hoping that they put their efforts where they need to be and develop efficiencies in hiring. That will make a big difference.
Pursuant to the, that's a legal term, pursuant to the question I just asked, the new building at Lehman College, where BronxNet is located, as a matter of fact, there's going to be a nursing building and a big nursing program. Can we assume that you're happy about that, and that may alleviate some of the shortage, nursing
Yes,
shortages?
for years we've asked Montefiore to partner with the union to go and do presentations and recruitment in nursing schools. They refuse to do so. Now in our contract, there is an agreement to work together.
Wow.
Yep.
Sounds like you're very pleased with the deal, overall deal. I don't want to repeat ourselves, but
On paper, we're very pleased. You
And-
know that the devil's in the details, and
and also in the enforcement of it and the application of it. Also curious about, now I realize that you're focused on Montefiore Medical Center. I'm also curious about other hospitals. Is the theme the same? For example, Mount Sinai, which was the other hospital that was last in, so to speak, did they have similar problems, or do the problems that you have articulated transfer from one to the other?
I mean, there's different situations. We have safety net hospitals that are not academic, well-renowned academic medical centers. We have academic medical centers that don't have the same safety net issues that we have here. But Montefiore should do a lot better. It's not like a hospital like Brooklyn Hospital or Interfaith, which were bankrupt. Montefiore is clearly not bankrupt. It's the way they decide to spend their money, invest in real estate, invest in other areas. For example, they closed the Grand Concourse facility, and we're investigating opening up a concierge service in Hudson Yards. That doesn't serve our Bronx community. They invest and put a lot of energy and money into White Plains Hospital, but not in our Bronx facilities where we have such an underserved population. We think the priorities of the medical center need to change. They do get federal funding. They are going to work with us to get more programs for the Bronx. They say they need money. We were thinking of doing a GoFundMe to get Montefiore money so it could invest in the Bronx. If we have to do that, we will. But we think that the Bronx deserves much better than what they're getting.
You and I have known each other for a very long time. I'm going to ask you an unfair question if you don't want to answer. So you got something nice you want to say about Montefiore Medical Center? Just something that you say, you know what, this is good.
The nurses and the doctors, the caregivers are
I stepped right into it.
They are amazingly wonderful human beings who go out of our way, go well beyond to take care of our patients in spite of the lack of resources.
Right. And maybe now, I mean, I always try to be hopeful. Maybe now, they'll get a better chance to do that. Any final things that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to mention? Because we did pretty good here.
I mean, I think the bottom line is the fact that healthcare is a dysfunctional system. It's a for-profit system, as you know. We are very much in support of the New York Health Act and legislation to create a single-payer type of system where patients can get what they need, not based on their income, not based on their zip code, but based on the fact that healthcare is a human right, a human need, and as a society, we should be providing that. I think that's the overarching element here.
I took a look at the last time you were on Bronx Talk, and we did talk about health insurance. And as I recall, we held up a bill that none of the three people, including me and you, and there was a health advocate, could figure out what it actually meant. I'd love to square that away. I mean, maybe the Health Act will do that. That would be great. Listen, Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez, first of all, thank you for taking care of people in the Bronx and being a nurse for 40 years. And also thank you for helping to solve what was a big problem, and hopefully it will be solved to the betterment of all in the future. And appreciate your time this evening.
Sure. Thanks for having
Great. Folks, that will do it. Once again, happy birthday to Anderson. I don't know. I don't even know if I'm invited to the party or whatever. It doesn't matter. But you know what? Thanks to Bahar and thanks to Judy. And we'll see you next week. Good night.